Up and down the length and the breadth of the country, our team of reporters are out and about, hunting down some of Britain's best-loved hidden treasures, but only their favourites will find their way into the People's Museum. Welcome to the People's Museum, an internet museum that displays some of the best museum artefacts from all over the country and put together on display for the very first time. Our team of reporters have trawled through 80 museums all over Britain and Northern Ireland, from the smallest private galleries to the biggest national museums, in order to put together a very impressive display. So let's find out what stories we've got coming up on today's programme and which items are going to make it through to the People's Museum. Well, first up, Jonathan Foyle is going to be in a very important library in Leeds, nominating an extremely influential book. Mohini Soulé is in the Midlands to nominate one of Britain's greatest fighting machines. Jules Hudson will be visiting the University City of Oxford to celebrate a broadcasting first. And north of the border, reporter Vanessa Collingridge will be in Glasgow's Kelvingrove Gallery for a moving wartime story. 4 different items from across the country will make their way into the People's Museum, and on the lookout for his first nomination on today's show is reporter Jonathan Foyle.
It's a bit nippy. I'm in the financial capital of the north here. Some call it the Knightsbridge of the north. I'm in Leeds, but banks and shops are no good to us because we're looking for objects suitable for the People's Museum. So my first port of call is here to Leeds University, because inside is the Brotherton Library, and that holds a treasure beyond measure.
Because today we're getting up close and personal with a lock or two of hair belonging to a couple of the world's most famous musicians. Then a celebrated hero of the First World War is rediscovered. And lastly, from an age well before TV dinners, we learn how to do cuisine a la 16th century.
My star today deserves a bigger stage. Without it, we'd have had a very different literary and theatrical Britain. So, without further ado, let's make our entrance. If you want to remember your loved ones today, what do? Take a photograph or maybe even a video. But what would you have done before the age of photography? Well, you could have had a portrait made, maybe. But they're not the most portable thing. So what about something more intimate and long-lasting, like a lock of hair? Very often the case when people went away, they would leave a bit of their fringe behind in a locket. And that's exactly what appealed to an early breed of autograph hunter who collected hair from the famous. And there's no better time for getting a locket than when they're dead. That's what happened here in the Brotherton Library. There are 2 wonderful examples of hair from genius musicians. This one is Mozart. You can see the beautiful rich brown colour there. He died aged 35, so his hair's still youthful looking. But here is Beethoven. And that lock there, much greyer and a bit crusted up with bits of glue, it looks like to me. So what are they doing here in the library? Well, they were collected by a man called Vincent Novello, who collected money for Mozart's widow, Constanza. And in 1829, he took the princely sum of £63 to her, and she said, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And he said, "Yes, give me a lock of your husband's hair," and he got it.
Founded in 1904, Leeds University is not only one of the largest employers in the city, it's also the most popular choice in the country with prospective students. Currently, there are over 30,000 students enrolled and doing their degrees here.
It's amazing, isn't it, what's tucked away in libraries? Do you know what's in the vaults of your public library? Because people could have donated anything, couldn't they? I do know that in the Brotherton here, there's something even more remarkable and certainly more useful than the locks of hair of Beethoven and Mozart. But first, before we get to that star item, there's something else I stumbled across I want to share with you. Have you heard of Bertie Ratcliffe? Neither had I. Richard, who was Bertie Ratcliffe?
Well, we have a photo of him here when he was already a prisoner of war. He was the nephew of Lord Brotherton, who funded this library, which was built in 1936. He was commissioned into the West Yorkshire Regiment in 1913 and went straight to the front when the First World War started. He was wounded in the Battle of the Marne in September 1914 and taken prisoner. He then spent almost 3 years in a prisoner of war castle in Bavaria.
So how did he make his escape? Did he build a glider or something? What was it like?
Or not tunnelling either. No. He was being transferred from Bavaria, from the camp in Bavaria, to another camp quite near the Dutch border, near Cologne. And he took the opportunity to jump from the train. He then had to get to the Dutch border, which was 40 miles away.
How did he find his way?
Well, his mother had sent him this compass disguised as Harrogate toffee, and he had this sketch map which he'd made himself from an atlas, and so he was able to find his way from the train to the border.
So what about when he got back? Did he get a hero's welcome?
Presumably once they knew who he was and what it was all about, yes. And the king invited him to Windsor, and we have this letter here from the king's private secretary.
Okay, my dear Mr. Ratcliffe, the King is much pleased to hear you've escaped from Germany and heartily congratulates you on your enterprise. Should you happen to be in London any time, would you be so kind as to let me know, as I'm sure His Majesty would like to see you and hear from your own mouth all about your experiences. Thrilling. So did he go and have tea with the King?
I think he had lunch, actually. He was lucky man.
So the first escapee from World War I mean, no one's going to take that away, so it must be a prized collection for you, this.
This is certainly one of the most striking.
In fact, Bertie Ratcliffe's amazing collection of memorabilia is just a tiny section of the huge World War I collection the Brotherton Library holds.
I thought pigs were supposed to be intelligent animals. You don't see any in a library, do you? But then maybe the really smart pig wouldn't come anywhere near here, because the Brotherton has a fabulous collection of early cookbooks that tell you how to roast a piglet. They've got a great collection of cookery books. And the wonderful thing about them is, of course, everyone cooks or everyone eats, so we all share, we can all relate to these things. Now, the earliest ones we've got, printed in English, date to the 16th century. This one here happens to be 1584, and it is a Bouquet of Cookery. And open it up, what have you got? To bake a pig. Take your pig and slay it, and draw out all that clean which is within his belly, and wash him clean and parboil him, season it with cloves, mace, nutmegs, pepper and salt, and so lay him in the paste with good store of butter. Now, here's a more modern book. It's Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management. This is the first time that it's clearly set out which ingredients we want, how much we expect them to cost, how to prepare them, and then how long they should be cooked for. You might think of Mrs. Beeton as being something of a widow-like figure herself, maybe a lady of 60 or 70 who's compiling a lifetime's experience. It might surprise you then to learn that she was 25 when she wrote this, and she died by the time she was 28. Well, I've had great fun today browsing in the Brotherton Library. We've seen Mozart and Beethoven's hair, and that wonderful little map that Bertie Ratcliffe drew to make good his escape during World War I. How exciting was that? Then we had a little taste of the past, but wait for the performance of the final item, because without it, we'd be so much the poorer. We'd be without 2 star-crossed lovers, or a pound of flesh, or much else besides in the works of the world's most famous playwright, William Shakespeare, because this is Shakespeare's first folio. So what is it? Let's turn the clock back to 1616. Shakespeare has just died. During his life, he penned 38 plays. On his death, he hadn't provided a full printed record of what he'd written. So it was left to actor friends, people like Richard Burbage, to compile all they could of Shakespeare's known works and print them for the first time. Now, it took them 7 years until they finally came up with this volume. And here we have 36 of Shakespeare's plays. There were 750 copies printed. Of those, less than 1/3 survive today. 40 of them are in England, and this is as good as they come. So, Chris, if I could give you a scenario, what would have happened if these fellows hadn't collected Shakespeare's plays and published them in this book?
Well, what is almost certain is that Shakespeare would have been half the writer that we think he is. You see here a list of all the plays which are collected in this book. There are 35 listed, although in fact there are 36 in there. Another play was added at the last moment. And of those 36 plays, 18 had never been seen before, never been printed. Half of them had been produced in rather scrappy copies that were given away in theatres or sold for sixpence. And the people putting the book together took the trouble to search around the theatres, to ask their friends and so on, in order to try and get copies of these plays that they knew Shakespeare had written. And they included plays like Macbeth, The Winter's Tale, Twelfth Night, plays which are now right up there in the Shakespeare canon, which we wouldn't even have known had been written if these men hadn't brought them together and printed them here for the first time.
Why should this book be in the People's Museum?
There's a kind of charisma and iconic status to this book. And for the People's Museum, I think that's important, because although it's here, it was given to us by Lord Brotherton, specifically saying he wanted everyone who could enjoy seeing it to see it. This was something he said quite clearly when he made his gift to us. And that's how I see it. It does belong to everybody, and so it should.
Well, there's no doubt this book has influenced our literary and theatrical history for the last 400 years. Imagine a world without Shakespeare's comedies and tragedies, plays like Julius Caesar, Twelfth Night, As You Like It, The Tempest. What about the influence that his works have had on other authors in that time? And then there's the 3,000 or so words that Shakespeare's thought to have coined that are now in common parlance, and also the stock phrases. If things have ever disappeared into thin air, or maybe you've been hoisted by your own petard, those are Shakespeare's own phrases. Shakespeare must have affected your life. Maybe you read his work, maybe you've seen the plays or seen a film of Shakespeare, or maybe you use the words or phrases that he coined and passed down to us today. Now, it's thanks to that first folio that that rich cultural legacy remains with us.
Wow, that is an important object, if ever there was one. Can you imagine if that folio hadn't been put together? We would have had no Shakespeare, a worthy item in the People's Museum. So our first item is in place. Now, you know, one of the most difficult things about making this series has been having to choose just one item from each museum that we visit. And there are literally tens of thousands of worthy items. And who knows how many fascinating stories there are out there, but choose we must. And with the next nomination, here's Mohini Soule.
Today I'm in Birmingham and I've come to show you a museum that's full to the brim of human achievement, innovation and life-changing technology. Inside are machines and devices that have had an effect on all of our lives in some small way. So join me and let's have a look around the Think Tank Science Museum.
We'll be marvelling at the fastest thing on four wheels in 1947, watching a 200-year-old robot at work, and boarding a tram for a trip down memory lane. Now, the first thing I want to show you is a sleek and streamlined machine which famously broke the land speed record in 1947.
Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking this was a modern vehicle. I mean, just look at it. It's sleek, it's shiny, aerodynamic, and very futuristic, considering it was built all those years ago.
In 1947, the Railton Mobile Special broke the world land speed record. John Cobb drove it at an average 394 miles per hour over a 12-mile course on the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah, and it regained the title of fastest car in the world, which it had previously held twice in the 1930s. It was given to the Think Tank Museum by Sally Jocelyn, and it truly is a speedy-looking customer.
These days, the vehicles that try to break the record have huge jet turbine engines and fancy foils on the back of the tail. But as you can see, the Railton is a much more sleek design, and all the power comes right through the wheels, just like on a normal car. That's exactly why they had to be so huge, because they had to be able to grip tightly to the salt track. Now, just imagine what it would have been like for the driver, sitting in this tiny cockpit sandwiched between two huge wheels. Its record wasn't broken until Donald Campbell's Bluebird came along in 1964, but that car was twice as powerful and 50 times more expensive, so it's clear that the Railton was way ahead of its time.
Set up as an educational resource in 2001, the Think Tank Science Museum is one of the jewels in Birmingham's crown. Housed in the modern Millennium Point building, its collection boasts over 20 working engines and machines. As well as the displays of more everyday items that give a clue to how production methods have affected our normal lives, visitors can trace the manufacturing legacy of this area back over 200 years, from the elegant to the functional.
Now, this may look like a fairground ride, but in actual fact, it's a sewage pump, and it dates back to 1884. It was made by James Watt's company. He was one of the men who pioneered the steam engine, and this particular one comes from Hull. Not the most pleasant of jobs for a machine, but nevertheless, it had to be done, and it definitely improved people's lives in Hull. Now, on average, this would pump out 45,000 tonnes of sewage every day.
And James Watt's sewage pump was just one of the mechanised advances of Victorian times which pushed Britain into the modern age. But it's time to get back above ground with a rather more beautiful Victorian invention.
Now, before we get to my nomination for the People's Museum, I just had to show you this tram because it really stands out in the museum amongst all the high-tech machines. Look at it. It really is rather elegant. Now, back in the day, trams would have been pulled by horses, until 1904, that is, when the first electric tram appeared in Birmingham. Soon enough, by the 1930s, there were over 800 of them running across the city. But would you believe that this is the only surviving Birmingham tram? There are no others left. Now, this particular one ran from 1912 for 27 years, and I think you'll agree by looking at it, it's still in pretty good nick. All this ornate ironwork, it really is quite romantic and would have been perfect for the first date.
Trams were an essential and hugely popular form of transport in Birmingham in the 1920s and 30s, carrying an impressive 250 million passengers in 1927 alone. Trams were hard-working, hard-wearing vehicles, and each tram covered an average of 80 miles a day, clocking up 1 million miles in its lifetime. But trams were more than just workhorses. Though they formed a vital part of the Midlands transport network, their classical design also attracted a devoted following.
You can't help but notice it's really ornately decorated. Why is that?
Things were like that in the Victorian age. Even the interior, there's scroll work and everything in there, which you don't get on the modern bus. It's too expensive nowadays. For instance, the seats turn over on this because you don't turn a tram round. It came to an end and went the other way. You can drive it from both ends. So the seat flops over so that you're facing the direction of travel. Buses have got nothing on them at all.
And what kind of people would have ridden on a tram? Rich, poor, both?
Not necessarily just anyone, because very few people had cars. Certainly in the 20s they didn't have cars, so they just took it for granted. The tram went everywhere anyway, miles out as regards Birmingham. So it was just a natural thing.
And how much was the average fare?
A penny I paid, a halfpenny when I was a kid. That doesn't equate now. I mean, it was less than an ordinary penny, as we know now.
Wandering around this museum is a bit like a factory. Around every corner there's a different machine with levers clanging into place and cogs whirring. And as you can see, many of these machines are still in working order. Take these two, for example. They look like something out of a sci-fi film, but they are in fact robotic arms that come from a Jaguar car factory. Now, these two in particular have been programmed for welding, and when you see them doing a demonstration just like this, it makes you realise just how far modern manufacture has come along. But it didn't always used to be this way.
Factory factory work used to be much more labour-intensive, and factories were big employers around here. In 1931, Birmingham had 5,856 factories in full production, employing much of the city's million-strong population.
The Midlands has an age-old reputation for manufacture, and it's richly deserved. During the Second World War, many of the vehicles, parts and weapons that emerged from this area helped our troops fight on the front line.
The people working in the factories here in the Midlands were essential to the war effort from 1939 to 1945. And one of their most important contributions was today's nomination, the Test Spitfire. Designed by Reginald Mitchell in 1934, the Spitfire is probably the single most iconic object of the Second World War. And this Supermarine Spitfire is one of the earliest examples ever flown. It was the last but one Mark IX model to be assembled at Castle Bromwich, Birmingham's major Spitfire manufacturing and testing plant, where over 11,000 planes were made. Built in 1944, this test Spitfire was used for testing and training fighter pilots in ground attack techniques. And using its Rolls-Royce engine to fly at speeds of up to 408 miles per hour, it was dangerous work.
Now, this particular Spitfire was never actually flown in combat, but it was used for testing and training fighter pilots in ground attacking techniques. And it's thanks to this plane, others like it, and the teams behind them that the RAF won the Battle of Britain.
22,000 Spitfires were made during the war, more than any other aircraft, and over half of them were assembled at the Castle Bromwich Works in Birmingham. 14,000 people were employed at this site, many of them women who sewed canvas onto tail elevators and rudders, and it was also an important test facility. The men at the centre flew and tested the planes, putting them through their paces before the pilots flew them in combat. This was a highly dangerous task and a huge responsibility, and it was thanks to these men that the Spitfire became the plane it was.
We were very much indebted to all the people in the background here at Castle Bromwich and down at Southampton. After Reggie Mitchell had finished the design and Joe Smith took over, and I've got a book at home with the names of all the people concerned. You know, right down to the little girl in the office, you know, and they all did such a marvellous job. It was capable of doing practically every job that was asked of it. There were so many other fighters that did just one job, but the Spitfire did every job and did it all very well indeed.
Just imagine for a moment what it would have been like to be sitting in that close confined space, adrenaline pumping through your veins, not knowing this time round whether you'd get shot down or whether you'd return home to the safety of your loved ones. At the very least, a pilot could take comfort in the fact he was in a cutting-edge plane that had been tried, tested and fine-tuned by a highly skilled team. It was thanks to these almost forgotten people that the RAF took to the skies and returned victorious. Without the Spitfire, historians believe that the Battle of Britain, indeed the whole war, might well have been lost to the Germans. The Spitfire outflew and outfought the enemy. An unknown English pilot once said, while flying the Spitfire, you felt like you were Henry V in armour and Joan of Arc at the stake all at the same time. The success of the plane is, of course, thanks to the hard work of the engineers, test pilots and trainers whose determination and expertise gave the pilots the most cutting-edge fighting plane in the world.
I know that the Spitfire has a place in many people's hearts, and now it also has a place in our People's Museum too, the Supermarine Spitfire. What an iconic machine. So far, two fascinating items have now found their way into the People's Museum. So it's now time to add a third, and with his choice, here's our reporter, Jules Hudson.
Today I'm at a museum that's dedicated to the story of how throughout the ages man has questioned, experimented and overcome the elemental world. I'm at the Museum of the History of Science, and where better to find it than in that ancient seat of learning, Oxford. Now, with a building that's packed with so many objects relating to some of human history's greatest endeavours, clearly we are going to have a lot to choose from. So follow me inside and let's see if we can't put a bit of science into the People's Museum. because today we'll be looking at a 17th century equivalent of a Ouija board, a blackboard with a very famous mathematician's calculations on it, and of course there is one very special item, but before we get to it, there's a few things I'd like to show you. Starting with Queen Elizabeth I's astrolabe. What's an astrolabe? Well, amongst other things, it's a device for telling your horoscope. Now, it looks incredibly complicated. Would the Queen have actually used it herself?
She might well have used it, but she also had her own experts in mathematics, philosophy and astrology, one of whom we happen to have something of here. John Dee was her primary consultant in these things.
But how did it work?
That is a zodiac circle. It's basically a calendar. That's the year. And the sun, on any day of the year, is somewhere on that circle. So as this thing turns around, that's mapping the movement of the sun across the sky.
So would Dee have actually used this particular astrolabe to predict the Queen's horoscope?
Well, taking the Queen's horoscope is dangerous. If you can predict what's going to happen to the Queen, when's she going to die? That is treasonous knowledge to have. We don't do that. But you can do other things for the Queen. Dee certainly, as an astrologer, decided for her the best day for her coronation. And in the museum we have, if I just put this down, we have an object from Dee. This is John Dee's Holy Table, extraordinary creation.
Now, to me, this looks like a child's game board.
Yeah, it does. I mean, a game board, a Ouija board almost, with all of these characters around it. But it's not any ordinary sort of game, I think.
What does it actually do?
It's an altar, in a sense. An altar for conversations. And there were conversations not with people, not even with dead spirits, but with angels, living angels.
So all these symbols around here, then, are a kind of language that the angels would use to communicate with Dee?
Yep. The angels dictated through a medium, through a scryer, as it was called then, these characters. And these characters are angelic language, a divine language, dating back to the time before the fall in the Garden of Eden. Adam would have spoken this language. Dee was recovering this primordial, powerful language of the world.
So a well-respected scientist, a royal philosopher, mathematician and astrologer, spent so much time thinking he could talk to angels. Was he not just bonkers?
Nowadays, we might think so. But actually, if you think back to that time, it was absolutely standard belief that angels exist. But Dee was, in the mainstream, really sincerely believed that he was able to converse with angels. He'd been chosen, almost as a prophet, to reveal the truth about nature, the world, and God.
This museum is housed in the old Ashmolean building in the heart of Oxford, which is the world's oldest surviving purpose-built museum, built in 1683. The collection extends to 10,000 items, and its aim is to preserve the material relics of past science. But it's not just a museum. It also serves as a department of the University of Oxford to aid historians in their research. So if scientific instruments like astrolabes, sundials, quadrants, microscopes and telescopes are your thing, the Museum of the History of Science is the place for you.
It's a sort of good introduction to the whole science thing and just brings it all to life, really. You can really see the workings of science.
Now, this might look like just a blackboard to the naked eye, but believe me, it is no ordinary blackboard, because this one was used by mathematician, physicist, genius, Nobel Prize winner, international icon, and now action figure, Dr. Albert Einstein, father, of course, of the theory of relativity. And these equations are written by his very hand. In 1931, Einstein was giving a lecture to physicists and mathematicians at Rhodes House, just around the corner from here, at Oxford University. He was already a bit of a celebrity in his field, which is why, as soon as his lecture came to a close, someone hooked the blackboard off the wall and brought it straight round to the museum for display, knowing that after Einstein's death, it would become a treasured item. And they were right, but this must be the only blackboard in a museum collection, because after all, blackboards normally get cleaned, yet this one hasn't been touched for 85 years. Now, these are no idle doodles. They relate to profound cosmological issues. But to be honest, if you can make sense of them, you're a better man than I am. The Museum of the History of Science has something for all lovers of invention. But there is one object here that's really caught my eye, and I think you're going to love it, because without it, you wouldn't be watching the telly right now. This simple microphone was the source for the world's first ever live radio broadcast. And who was behind it? Well, none other than the great pioneer of radio, Guglielmo Marconi, who at the time owned the Marconi Wireless Telegraph Company. Wireless radio in the early 1900s was only used for transmitting messages, but in 1920, Marconi came up with the brilliant idea to broadcast music to the public, and the first person to use this microphone was the famous opera singer, Dame Nellie Melba.
So Marconi was always looking, he was a great entrepreneur, and he had this company, he had the technology, and when a new opportunity came up, a new idea came up for making use of the same technology, then Marconi is just the man who's going to go for it.
But why did they pick Nellie Melba?
Well, you don't know why you want a radio at this stage. You haven't heard of it, and Marconi is a great publicist, so he has to sell you something that you really want, and Nellie Melba is the greatest singer in the world. So he sets up this famous broadcast with Dame Nellie, and hardly anyone can listen to it. But the point is that they hear that it's happened and they think, well, instead of having to go to the opera house or having to go to the concert hall, which I probably can't do, I've probably never heard Nellie Melba, the famous soprano, live. If I have a radio, I can listen to it at home. So going for the best singer for this pioneering broadcast that hardly anyone could hear was a great selling point.
Do you know what song she actually sang?
She didn't sing something really obscure. That wouldn't have worked. This had to be a medium of popular entertainment. She began with Home Sweet Home, then she went on to other popular things, and she ended with the national anthem.
What's it actually made of?
Well, it's adapted from what's around. That's what's interesting. The body of it is a telephone mouthpiece. And then they have, in order to focus the sound, they've made this kind of horn thing, and they've made it out of the wood from a cigar box. So it's just put together with what's around. Pioneering work is often like that.
And what's this on the side?
Well, that's the best bit, in a way, because it's clear that they knew something very important and historic was happening. So at the end of the recital, Dame Nellie has signed the microphone. So
and I can just make out 1920.
1920. It was actually the 15th of June, 1920, and it says Nellie Melba.
This little beauty is where the history of broadcast media as we know it all began, with that medley of songs from Dame Nellie to that tiny audience back in 1920. Now, although it looks very, very simple, this represents a key moment in the history of broadcast and entertainment as we know it. Just 2 years later, you could buy a radio on the high street, and the BBC was broadcasting the weather forecast every day. And just a short while after, televisors, or televisions as we know them, were introduced, using very similar technology, but this time to broadcast pictures. Well, quite simply, without it, the film you're watching right now may well be silent. The technological leap that it represents has given us the TV and the radio that we all now take for granted. The Dame Nellie Melba microphone.
So, item number 3 today, the Marconi microphone, a symbol of the starting point of all broadcasting media. You can't really begin to imagine the influence that has had on the world today. You know, I'm always astounded by the extraordinary wealth of fascinating stories you can find in our museums all over the country. And you know, there are well over 1,500 museums that you can go and visit. And that doesn't include all the hundreds of tiny little private collections. The People's Museum is, of course, a virtual museum. It's on the internet. But there will be a real museum near you. Make sure you go and visit. I guarantee it'll be full of great human stories. Please give it your support. Right now, with our final nomination for today's show, here's our reporter, Vanessa Collingridge.
Today I'm in Glasgow at the grand and spectacular Kelvin Grove Art Gallery and Museum. It's in the final stages of a huge £27.9 million refurbishment project that's been going on for about 3 years. Glasgow locals and tourists are waiting with bated breath to see one of their favourite museums reopen its doors again this summer. But I've been given privileged access to have a look around. And there's one very special object in there that more than deserves its place in the People's Museum. Come with me. up, we have a look at an extraordinary piece of modern art, which oddly enough is set in a curry house down the road. Then, well, have you ever heard of an orrery? All will be revealed. And we meet the legendary Sir Roger. Now, there's nothing I like more than to stand and look at an object or painting for hours on end, slowly seeing more and more things I hadn't noticed to begin with. And this certainly is one of those objects. It's called Mr. Singh's India, and it's painted by the Singh sisters. Now, the Singh sisters are identical twin Sikh artists, and they were commissioned by Glasgow Museums to create a piece for an exhibition called Entwined, which was to illustrate and celebrate the links between the Sikh and the Glasgow communities. Sikhs make up 1/4 of the Asian population here. And there's not a single square millimetre in this painting that doesn't in some way depict relations between the two communities. At the heart of the picture, we have Mr. Singh's Indian restaurant with the two Singh sisters sitting down to have a meal with the Sikh warrior here. Now, to the left of the Sikh warrior is the Scottish warrior, William Wallace. And this has some nice echoes because up at the top, we have the Wallace Monument by Stirling Castle. And look here, you've got the characteristic football teams of Glasgow. You've got Rangers here and Celtic here sitting down for their meal. And behind them, you've got Billy Connolly, who's obviously just popped in for a quick curry, and the Glasgow Museum of Modern Art. Then right the way across here is where we are today, the Kelvingrove Art Gallery and Museum. The Kelvingrove houses one of the greatest civic collections in Europe, from fine and decorative arts to archaeology and the natural world. And what a superb place to house them. This is a Grade A listed property that in 1998, Glaswegians voted their favourite building in the whole city. With such a fine collection here, I'm spoilt for choice. But there is a clear treasure in my mind, which I'm going to introduce you to later. But before I get to it, I've just got to show you a beautiful and functional piece of clever design from the 1830s. Ever heard of an orrery? Well, actually, neither had I. So tell me, what is an orrery?
An orrery is a three-dimensional model of the solar system. So what we have here is the sun in the middle and the planets surrounding it. Now it's a mechanical model. Okay, so the good thing about the orrery is it's like a giant clock. It moves with time. So throughout time, the planets and the moons rotate around the sun. There's over 175 cogs in this orrery, and most of them are inside here. And as I turn the handle, the cogs inside turn, and the cogs up here, as you can see, turn, and it takes them to each of the individual planets and moons as they rotate around the sun.
How accurate is it?
It's actually mind-bogglingly accurate. John Fulton, who built this model, managed to create it so that it's so accurate that in the space of a year, as the Earth goes round the sun, if that was done in real time, it would only lose 2.5 seconds.
Wow. Meet Sir Roger. Now, he's been in the Kelvingrove collection since 1901, wowing children and adults alike. He really is one of the key celebrities here. But it's not just as a stuffed animal in a museum that he's achieved his fame. In fact, he was a star in his own right when he was alive and quite literally kicking.
Well, before he even came here, he had some degree of fame in life as he travelled the country up and down all over Britain in a small menagerie that was basically a travelling circus. Then he moved to Glasgow in 1897, came to the Scottish Zoo, and there he's again a popular exhibit, obviously one of the biggest animals in the zoo. Unfortunately, in late 1900, he developed must, which is a kind of extreme puberty for elephants. Male elephants get very aggressive, they get very temperamental, unpredictable, and after injuring a keeper, breaking an arm, breaking some of the guy's ribs, no other keepers could look after him. It was decided by the owner that he'd have to be put down. You can actually see the bullet hole in the center of his forehead. That was the main shot from the elephant gun that killed him.
So how did he end up here at the Kelvingrove?
He was gifted by Bostock, who gave lots of animals to the museum, lots of animals from the zoo and from his menageries. When they died, he donated them here. One of the few animal objects, if not the only one, that's actually called something. And this, gives him a bit more personality.
Well, he's a magnificent beast.
He is indeed.
Well, Sir Roger's certainly a well-loved centrepiece to the fantastic collection here at the Kelvin Grove, the most popular exhibit, in fact. So watch out for the stampede to come and see him this summer. Now, we've seen some fun and extraordinary things here at the Kelvin Grove. The unusual Glasgow Indian miniature-style painting, the clockwork model of the solar system, and a stuffed elephant. Just a few of the thousands of objects in the collection. But there's something here that deserves a place in our People's Museum. Something created over 60 years ago, but has only been on display once, 4 years ago, here at the Kelvin Grove. It's a painting by an artist you'll never have heard of, and the scene she's painted is not a beautiful one. This is a painting by amateur artist Marianne Grant called People Dead and Dying, and it was painted while the artist was held at Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in Germany. At the time of her captivity, Marianne, who was from Czechoslovakia, was just 17 years old. She painted this when she was 24. Marianne survived the atrocities of 3 concentration camps, including Auschwitz, using her artistry to impress the Nazi officers, and she still lives to tell the tale of how she was quite literally painting for her life.
It shows how terrible it was. It depicts a horrible situation. Auschwitz was the most desolate place. I wanted to show what was happening, the horrific, how badly we were treated.
You can see in the picture the artist Marianne is looking in, and there's this jumble, this pile of, and at first you don't really know what it is, and there's fabric hanging down on one side of the picture. But when you look closely, they're human forms, and they're people that, and Marianne has told us, they're the dead and the dying. People that were in Bergen-Belsen when she got there and saw that, and you can see that just the tragedy and the awfulness, and Marianne's pictured that for us, and we can get a sense. We have an opportunity to see that in that picture. It's grim, but it's compelling. I don't think there could be a better object to put into the People's Museum. It's a small painting, but it's got a big story to tell, and I think it does it extremely well.
Although these paintings depict something quite horrific, there's also something incredibly positive about them that represents beautifully the way the human spirit shines through in the face of unimaginable adversity, creating a stunning art whilst not knowing whether life or death was round the next corner. You don't have to be an art lover to appreciate the significance of Marianne Grant's painting. It speaks for itself, and for me, it's really struck a chord. It's no Picasso or Rembrandt, but it's about as real as art gets.
The Belsen paintings are a haunting reminder of one of the most terrible chapters of humanity, and quite rightly should have a place in the People's Museum. Right, that's about it from me, so until the next time, it's cheerio.